All right, people. So welcome to Jumbo IS and welcome to this lecture series called Daily News in Shorts, in which we cover the entire day's important news items in one lecture and within 30 minutes. The idea is that we quickly brush up all our current affairs with understanding so that you are covering current affairs on a daily basis. This is very important for civil services examination. Now, one important announcement before we begin today's lecture, and that is, which I'll repeat in every current affairs lecture. Well, the lecture is not complete if you have just watched it. Just after watching this lecture, you need to revise it from the notes provided by us. Those notes are shared on our Telegram channel, whose link is shared in the comment section below. Okay, so you can download it from there. Just after watching the lecture, you need to revise it and practice the MCQs alongside it. Okay, so this is very important. Only if you revise the lecture from the notes, then only I would consider your lecture to be complete. Otherwise, these current affairs would quickly skip your memory. You won't be able to retain them. So revision is extremely important. All right. Now, today we are going to be covering 24th March 2026 current affairs. Okay, so here we begin. All right. So daily current affairs, 24th March 2026 Tuesday, and here are the topics that we are going to cover. Number one, well, there has been a lot of talk regarding strategic oil reserves. Basically, Prime Minister gave a speech in the Parliament, and he said that there is nothing to worry as far as the oil disruption is concerned in the Strait of Hormuz. We have good strategic oil reserves. So what are strategic oil reserves? We'll talk about this. Then, well, Iran is bombing desalination plants in various Gulf countries. This can lead to a serious water crisis, fresh water crisis. Now, what are these desalination plants? What technology is used in this and how vulnerable they are? We'll talk about this. And how is India interested in them? Everything will be covered. Then, well, the thing is that we import natural gas from the Gulf. But currently we are witnessing an LPG crisis, but not LNG crisis. Now, what is the difference between LPG and LNG? Okay. And how are we not so much vulnerable with respect to LNG, but extremely vulnerable with respect to LPG? So what is the difference between the two and what are the vulnerabilities from India's standpoint with respect to these two gases? We'll talk about this. Okay. But the difference is very important. Okay. Then, well, a new bill has been introduced to overturn a previous Supreme Court judgment, and that was with respect to IPS officers in CAPF. CAPF stands for Centrally Armed Police Forces. CAPF includes CRPF, BSF, and many other Central Armed Police Forces. The top positions in these police forces, Central Police Forces, is headed by IPS officers. The Supreme Court basically said that you need CRPF officers to head CRPF, BSF officers to head BSF. But the center came out with a bill to reverse that. So we'll talk about this controversy. And we'll talk about Pakistan National Day, 23rd March. Every year is celebrated in India as National Martyrdom Day, okay, because Bhagat Singh was hanged till death, hanged to die. On this very day, we celebrate it as National Martyrdom Day, but Pakistan celebrates it as their Foundation Day. So what is the significance behind this date? We'll talk about this. Okay, so these are the 5 news items that we shall zero in our attention on. So let's start discussing them one by one, starting with topic number 1, and that is strategic oil reserves. Now look, we have discussed this in the previous current affairs lecture that if there is energy shortage in India, everything would suffer. Okay, remember we talked about second order effects, first order effects. If you're unaware of these effects, well, watch our previous current affairs lecture. Okay, first order effect is shortage of LPG and crude oil. Second order effect is, well, shortage of those items that are created by using this natural gas and crude oil as raw material. Okay, so plastics industry depends on crude oil. Okay, fertilizer industry uses natural gas as raw material. All these things would be in short supply. That would have an impact on farming if it's about fertilizer and other things if we talk about plastics, because everything is packaged in plastics. So everything would become expensive. Okay, so these are the second order effects. Now we know that Strait of Hormuz is blocked, and this is, well, basically a choke point for India, because most of our oil reserves are imported from that route, shipping route, and most of our natural gas also comes on shipping tankers from that route only. Now, this is a severe crisis, so Prime Minister had to address the nation. And while addressing the nation, he did warn that the crisis is becoming severe day by day, so we need to brace for it. We need to be prepared. But India need not worry that much, because India also keeps a buffer stock of crude oil as well as natural gas, but mostly crude oil. India keeps a buffer stock of crude oil for emergencies. That buffer stock, that stored crude oil, can only be used for emergencies. And now is the emergency time. Okay. So need not to worry. India won't suffer as much as other countries, though it would suffer because of this crisis, but not as much as other countries because we have good strategic reserves. Now, what are these strategic reserves? Let's talk about this. Okay. So strategic oil reserves. So what was in the news? Well, the conflict, a significant escalation in West Asia has disrupted energy flows. Okay. Now, Strait of Hormuz is a choke point for India. This narrow passage accounts for 25% of the world's oil and LNG supply. LNG stands for liquefied natural gas. Because natural gas is very difficult to transport. It is inflammable. Therefore, you first liquefy it, then store it on tankers on the ships, and then you transport it. Okay. And those tankers are also specialized because they have to maintain very cold temperatures to keep the gas liquefied. Okay. India's take. Nearly 50% of India's crude oil and 90% of its LPG imports transit through the strait. So a lot of supplies come from this Strait of Hormuz. That is why we are worried. Clear? Now, in view of such a situation, okay, because we always knew that, well, such a situation can arise anytime in future. That is why long back we started maintaining buffer stocks of these supplies. Okay, these are known as strategic petroleum reserves. Now, what are these? India maintains dedicated underground rock caverns. So there are these rocks, okay? Now you store it inside these rocks. So dedicated underground rock caverns to store crude oil for emergencies. Now this strategic reserve is managed by Indian Strategic Petroleum Reserve Limited. You created a special company for this to manage these strategic reserves, okay? That is why it is a special purpose vehicle, SPV, a special company for reserves only. And this special company is under Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas. Okay. Now the current capacity, what is India's current capacity? That is why we call it phase 1, because in phase 2, we are going to expand this capacity. Now, as per the current capacity, we have the capacity to store 5.33 million metric tons. One strategic reserve is in Visakhapatnam, one is in Mangaluru, one is in Padur, Karnataka. As of March 2026, the reserves are at 64% capacity. So we have this much capacity, but we have only 64% of this capacity. So that means 36% of these reserves are empty. Okay, this is important. So only around 2/3 of these reserves are full. Clear? Yet that is a lot. Total national capacity, which includes commercial stocks also. So it includes strategic reserves as well as some petroleum kept with oil companies or in pipelines. So if we add up the total capacity for India, it is a total amount of crude oil that is stored with India. It amounts to roughly 74 days. So for the next 74 days, if nothing comes to India, India can take care of its energy supplies. Though International Energy Agency, IEA, says that you need to have a capacity of 90 days. So we are short of that. And that is where phase 2 comes. So in phase 2, we are going to expand, okay, to other places also, expand our current SPR capacity. Okay, these are the expansion plans. To bridge the gap between current storage and the 90-day benchmark, the government has approved phase 2. So one would be in Chandikhol, Odisha, Padur, Karnataka. The goal is to increase SPR capacity to 11.83 million metric tons, okay, by 2028-29. So the project is already undergoing. This is what strategic petroleum reserves do. It is stored petroleum for emergencies. Okay. And right now we are in an emergency situation. Okay. Now, what should we do? What should be our strategic shift? What should we do now and for future also, so that we are not vulnerable to shocks like these? First of all, diversify your import basket further. You cannot depend on one particular source for petroleum. Okay, you need to have multiple sources. This is this old adage that don't keep all your eggs in one basket, because if that basket breaks, all your eggs would break, right? So we need to diversify to other countries that can supply oil. Then under 2021 policy, this special purpose vehicle can lease storage to foreign entities also. So if ISPRL does not have storage capacity, it can take on lease storage capacity from other companies also. So this is another model that can be used. All right. Now, what are the key challenges for India right now in its expansion plans? So, geological constraints. Strategic reserves are stored in underground rock caverns, but finding suitable sites is a technical challenge. They're not available everywhere, these rock caverns. That is why you'll see most of these rock caverns are in South India, because because peninsular India has many of these hard rocks, granite rocks. Okay, that's not available in the floodplains of North India. So this is a problem. Plus, there is very high cost attached to this storage. This is also a problem. Then logistical risks. While reserves exist, the ability to transport that oil to refineries across the country during a war is equally critical. You have reserves, but you have to transport these reserves to oil refineries from where petrol, diesel, and other things would come. That is also a challenge. And dependency on gas. While crude oil is stockpiled, there is no such reserve for LNG. And that is where we are suffering right now. There is severe gas shortage in India. So these are some challenges which we need to take care of. Okay. All right. Now let's move on to next news item, and that is Gulf desalination plants. You see, there is this old proverb. It says, water, water everywhere, but not a single drop to drink. 70% of the earth is water. Okay. And most of that water is in the oceans. But the problem is, ocean water is not fit for drinking or any other purpose also. Why? Because it is salty. It is saline. Very high amount of salt is there. Not fit for drinking at all. Clear? And the water that is fit for drinking and other domestic purposes is called fresh water. Fresh water is rare. Found in rivers, glacier melt, groundwater. That is rare. Now, there are many countries in the world that do not have freshwater resources. For example, the Gulf countries. They do not have that much fresh water because these are arid regions, desert regions. Now, how do they take care of their water requirements? These Gulf countries are close to sea. Yes, they are on a Gulf, so they are close to sea. But sea water is not fit for consumption. So what do? They take the help of technology. Technology exists which converts this saline seawater into fresh water. Now, for that, they need desalination plants. So there are these desalination plants which basically converts saline seawater into fresh water. These desalination plants are extremely complicated and they do require a lot of energy also. Now, as far as energy is concerned, well, the Gulf countries are not short of it, but yes, they're short of water. So most of the freshwater requirements of Gulf countries come from these desalination plants. Water is very essential for living. But in this Iran war, Iran basically targeted these desalination plants only. Because if water is in short supply in these Gulf countries, they would really suffer. So Iran targeted their, well, chicken's neck or neck, jugular, basically. Okay, they targeted their jugular, and that is these desalination plants. Now, what is important for us? Important for us is to know what are these desalination plants, how do they work, what technology is used in them, and what are the vulnerabilities for the Gulf countries when it comes to these desalination plants. And number two, how is India invested in this conflict or this water crisis? Let's talk about this, okay? So Gulf desalination plants. All right. So what was in the news? What is the threat? Recent geopolitical escalations have shifted focus from oil terminals to desalination plants. So Iran was first bombing oil refineries of Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, gas plants, gas fields. Now they are targeting their freshwater resources or desalination plants. The Gulf Cooperation Council, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, Oman are the most water stressed in the world. These countries do not have access to fresh water, but they are close to sea. So they rely on these desalination plants. Okay. Now, Iran is exploiting this vulnerability. Unlike oil, which can be stockpiled, strategic petroleum reserves, which we just talked about, water is difficult to store in large quantities for long periods because it evaporates. A disruption in desalination could lead to humanitarian crisis within days, and Iran knows about this. That is why, when their back was pushed against the wall, they targeted these desalination plants. Okay. Now, how do these desalination plants work? Well, they work on the principle of reverse osmosis. So pressure is applied, okay, with high pressure, and this pressure comes through electricity. Electricity is nothing but energy. So you supply a lot of electricity power, very high pressure is maintained, and well, salt water. So salt is deposited over here and fresh water gets transported over here. Pure water comes and you can use it. Okay. Now you don't have to basically invest that much of your time in understanding how reverse osmosis works, because we'll cover that in our science lectures. Don't worry. Just remember the technology. There are two technologies used in desalination plants. Okay, either of the two, basically. So reverse osmosis, and there is another technology which is called multi-stage flash distillation. So just remember the name. So either you use reverse osmosis plants or multi-stage MSF distillation plants. Okay, either of these two technologies are used in these Gulf desalination plants. Remember this part. Okay. Now, over 50% of the world's desalination capacity is located around Persian Gulf. Saudi Arabia's Saline Water Conversion Corporation is the world's largest producer of desalinated water because the Gulf countries are dependent on them heavily. See, what is the process? Seawater is drawn from the Persian Gulf, treated and pumped hundreds of kilometers inland into internal cities, not the coastal cities, internal cities of Saudi Arabia like Riyadh, and in UAE, it's Abu Dhabi. Abu Dhabi is not close to the sea. All right. Now, the problem is that there are certain vulnerabilities. So what are the vulnerabilities with respect to these desalination plants? There are specific vulnerabilities. It is very important. First of all, most of these desalination plants are on the coast. Obviously, they will be closer to the sea, right? Now, because they are so cluttered around the coast, it becomes very easy for Iran to target them. Their location is not secret, plus everyone knows they'll be closer to the sea. So Iran can easily target the coastline. Then, number two vulnerability is, well, Iran can also damage them by a deliberate oil spill in the ocean. So if an oil tanker is destroyed, oil spills to this ocean, and now these desalination plants would be sucking, well, oil contaminated water, which is very difficult to distill. So this is there. Then another problem is the brine problem. Most of these desalination plants collect the salt from this seawater and then throws it again into the sea. Now the sea around these desalination plants becomes even more saltier because the salt collected is again thrown back. This makes the process of, well, desalinizing the water even more difficult, because now you'll be taking, well, seawater that is even more saltier. That requires more energy. So these are the vulnerabilities. Now, why is India interested in this crisis? Why should we worry that Gulf would be suffering from a water crisis? First of all, there are many Indians in these areas. Okay. Then number two, many companies and many Indian companies' investments are in these areas. A severe water crisis can destroy the economy of that area. Clear? Plus, well, this area is important for our energy supplies. If there is no water, there won't be workers in the oil wells that dig up this oil and transport it to India. So we are interested for our energy supplies, investments, and diaspora. So that is why we are invested. Okay. Now, what should be the way forward? What are the mitigation strategies for these Gulf countries? Water grids. GCC nation, Gulf Cooperation Council nations, are working on interconnected water grid to allow countries to share water in emergencies. Okay. If a country has surplus water, it can transfer it to deficit country. Strategic aquifer storage and recovery. All this pumped water can be stored underground in, well, wells. Okay, so you can store more and more water after desalinizing it. Surplus water. This would be like a water SPR, Strategic Petroleum Reserve, and renewable desalination. Because remember, these desalination plants require a lot of energy. Most of this energy or electricity comes from burning fossil fuels. Now, this pollutes the environment and causes climate change. Greenhouse gases are released. So, if you are able to transition to not fossil fuel based energy, but renewable energy, then this would be easy on climate change also. Greenhouse gas emissions would decline. So this is another vulnerability. Okay, that's the thing. All right. Now let's talk about third news item, and that is difference between LPG and LNG. LPG stands for liquefied petroleum gas, that's the full form, and LNG stands for liquefied natural gas. Now we import natural gas from the Strait of Hormuz. Okay, but in India, you are witnessing LPG shortage, or there is an emergency like situation in case of LPG cylinders, but not LNG. I mean, it is a crisis, but it's not that bad as it is for LPG. Now, first of all, we need to know what is the difference between LPG and LNG. And second of all, why LPG problem is more severe than LNG problem. Okay, so let's talk about these two things. Let's quickly discuss this. So difference between LPG and LNG. So first of all, let's straight away jump into LPG. So this is LPG, this is LNG. So composition. So LPG contains a gas called propane and butane, whereas LNG contains mostly methane. More than 90% of LNG is methane. So this is chemical composition. Source. Byproduct of natural gas processing and petroleum refining. It is extracted directly from underground. There are gas fields. Okay. State change. Liquefies at moderate pressure and at room temperature. Okay. So it can be liquefied at room temperature only if you apply enough pressure, very high pressure, and it can be easily liquefied. For LNG, for natural gas, first of all, you have to reduce the temperature drastically at minus 162 degrees Celsius and then apply pressure. That is why there are specialized containers which are known as cryogenic containers in which you keep LNG and then transport it on ships. Then energy density, higher energy per weight, lower energy density. Primary use, residential cooking, okay? And LNG is used in power generation, fertilizer production, city gas distribution through pipelines. Gas is distributed through pipelines, and this is distributed through cylinders, right? This is the difference. Now, as far as LPG is concerned, well, the vulnerability is that 90%, and listen to me very carefully, 90% of our LPG imports come from Strait of Hormuz. Whereas in case of LNG, well, India also produces its own LNG. And our dependency is as low as 50% when it comes to Strait of Hormuz in case of LNG. That is why LPG is a bigger problem. Okay. Plus the LNG transportation mechanism is also given in your notes. So how is LNG transported? First of all, well, natural gas is extracted, then it is liquefied. Okay. Then it is kept in these cryogenic containers. Okay. Transported. Then it is regasified. It is in liquid form, then it is gasified again. And then it is transported to fertilizer plants, city gas distribution, everything. So, well, India has considerable capacity when it comes to this, but not LPG. That is why LPG is suffering. You understand? So remember this table. It is shared in your notes. Just remember this, okay? Because an MCQ can come in the light of recent circumstances or emergency situations, okay? All right. Now, impact of the West Asia crisis. The closure of Strait of Hormuz creates a dual threat to Indian households and industry. Indian households also and industry. Why households? For cooking fuel. Industry. Many industries are dependent on gas. There will be fertilizer crisis because LNG is required for fertilizer production. There is domestic fuel shock. Prices would increase. Cooking fuel would become expensive. There is price inflation because LNG contracts are often linked to Brent crude prices. The spike in oil prices has made imported gas prohibitively expensive for power plants. You also produce electricity through natural gas also. This would create inflationary shocks. Clear? Now, what is government role? Now, it is because of some actions of the government that we are facing these crises. Okay, what are those actions? First of all, PM Ujjwala Yojana. Under PM Ujjwala Yojana, every household will be provided with LPG cylinders. Okay, even the poorest of the households would not have to depend on firewood. They can have LPG cylinders. This increased the demand for LPG in India. And this demand is hurting us now when we are in short supply. Then gas-based economy. India wants to reduce its dependence from oil towards natural gas because oil gives out a lot of greenhouse gases And natural gases, when you burn natural gas, it doesn't give out that many greenhouse gases. So this was a climate change action. This also increased demand for natural gas. And now this is hurting us. Okay. Now, there are two things that, well, we should have done to solve this problem. Number one, coal bed methane, biogas. We should expand this. And if this Tapi pipeline would have been functional, we could have had an alternative route for natural gas. But this is not there. All right. So the fourth topic is IPS officers in CAPF. Now, to understand this topic, you need to know a few things. First of all, well, police is a state subject. Okay, police is a state subject. So police comes under state governments. But central government has kept certain forces under it. Okay, like BSF, Border Security Force, Indo-Tibetan Border Police Force, CRPF, that is under central government. Now, all these forces, these paramilitary forces are categorized under one single category, and that is CAPF, Central Armed Police Forces, right? Now, up till now, the top position, the leadership position in these police forces, Central Armed Police Forces like CRPF, BSF, was occupied by IPS officers, Indian Police Service, IPS officers, who also take care of state police. They were also given top positions in these CAPF forces. Now, most of these CAPF people, they were against this because a person, after giving CAPF exam, you become assistant commandant. Your hope is that one day you will head this organization. But that is given to a person from outside force. So basically, there was this demand that CAPF joinees should be given these top positions. Someone who joins CAPF or CRPF from start should be able to head the CRPF organization. It shouldn't be given to IPS. Okay, these people filed a case in Supreme Court. Supreme Court ruled in their favor and said top position shouldn't be given to IPS officers. But central government was against it, and central government said, well, central government, to negate the Supreme Court judgment, they came out with a bill. Okay, and in that bill, IPS officers will be given leadership roles in these CAPF organizations. So this is the entire controversy. Now, there are some arguments in favor of this bill. There are some arguments in favor of Supreme Court judgment. So let's take a look at that. Okay, that's about it. All right. So IPS officers in CAPF. So what was the context? Supreme Court verdict. The Apex Court ruled that CAPF Group A officers are an organized Group A service. It directed the government to progressively reduce IPS deputation in CAPF up to the rank of Inspector General within 2 years to address career stagnation among cadre officers. CRPF people said that their career is stagnated beyond a point. Okay. Government's response, the Ministry of Home Affairs argued that IPS officers are essential for center-state coordination. Okay. Why? Because sometimes these CRPF people are deployed in some states. Now that state, for better coordination with that state, the key link nodal officer can be that IPS officer. So that is the reason. In 2026, a bill was introduced which effectively codifies and protects IPS presence, superseding the court's direction for progressive reduction. So you negated the court judgment by enacting a law. Okay. Now, arguments in favor and against. So arguments in favor of IPS leadership: federal coordination, strategic perspective. IPS training provides a broader administrative interagency perspective beyond. So CRPF people are only focused on CRPF. IPS people are trained in all overall comprehensive thing. Okay. Plus, it is an all-India service. Historically, IPS has been an integral part of CAPF command structure since independence. In fact, since British times only. Okay, but since independence majorly. But CAPF officers also have, Supreme Court also has a point. For example, career stagnation for those who were appointed directly to CAPF. Operational experience. IPS officers do not have experience in CRPF. That is a problem. And violation of, well, organized Group A services rights. Group A services, well, their leadership position should be reserved for that service only. So these are some arguments for and against this. Take a look at these arguments from your notes. And our last topic would be Pakistan National Day, Foundation Day, Lahore Resolution, 23rd of March. Now, 23rd of March every year is celebrated as Pakistan National Day. Why? Because in 1940, Lahore Resolution was passed. Now, Lahore Resolution was passed in a session of All India Muslim League in Lahore. And that basically was the first codified demand for Pakistan. That is why Pakistan is celebrated. Okay. Now, that's about it as far as this topic is concerned. Not much is there, though some details are given in your notes. Go through that. That's about it. We won't spend that much time on this. You can easily understand it from the notes. All right. And with that, we conclude today's session. So thank you so much for watching, everyone. And I am sure that it has added value to your preparation. But it would add more value if you're consistent and regular with this lecture series. Plus, you revise this lecture from the notes provided by us on our Telegram channel. So in the hope that you're going to do that, I shall take your leave with the promise of seeing you again with another tomorrow's current affairs. Thank you, everyone.